Okay, and I think we're live. Welcome to Lone Star Legacy. Um, this is the second half of our Eternal Weekend coverage. We have another three guys doing a report on the Legacy champs. So tonight we thought we would talk about Vintage champs. I'm Stu. I am a mainstay on this cast. And with me is Ben, if you want to say hi, Ben.
Yep, I'm Ben Kendrick. I'm also kind of a mainstay on this cast. So,
And then we have Tim too.
Yeah, hey guys, thanks for having me. Excited to talk about how this monstrosity did this weekend.
Hell yeah. Unless you guys want to just talk about Ted Cruz instead.
Oh, fuck you.
I absolutely do not.
Yeah. All right, yeah. So getting into Eternal Weekend, I know we did a Eternal Weekend prep podcast before the event, but that was maybe a little bit more generalized and to some extent focused on Legacy. So I guess as quick notes, Eternal Weekend 2018 was held in Pittsburgh. This is the second year in a row that it's been there. We sent out a pretty sizable team overall. From Austin, there were 8 of us. It was me and then Brian Tweedy, Patrick Vincent, Ryan Hockey, Rob Connolly, Travis Brown, and Jake Baltz. I may be forgetting someone. Michael Malley, too. And we are all staying in the Hyatt North Shore. And what did the Houston group look like?
We had 5 of us in our room, and then we had a few more Houston people who showed. There was probably about 8 to 10 Houston people there overall. Not all of them played Legacy and Vintage. There was a couple guys there just for old school, I think.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit fractured of a group, but we also stayed at the Hyatt, so we were right downstairs from y'all.
Hell yeah, the place to be.
It wasn't bad. It was pretty solid. It was only a 10, 15-minute walk to the convention center.
Yeah,
something
which I really liked personally. I mean, obviously there's something we said for staying like directly next to the convention center, but it's kind of nice in the morning to like wake up and go for a bit of a walk. It's chilly in Pittsburgh this time of year, and just like get your wake up in, go grab some coffee and all that.
Yeah, it wasn't so cold. Like I remember GP Louisville a few years ago, where we were like right around the corner from the convention center, and I was still pissed off because it was about 3 degrees the entire time. But it wasn't so cold that it was intolerable to walk over there. But
Tim,
it was a little chilly, different from Houston.
Tim, did you go to Louisville?
Yeah, I did. That was balls cold. It was like a high of 23 or something one day. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I didn't go. That was the one that was in the barn, right?
Yeah. It was
basically, yeah.
Stable, yeah.
Yeah,
it was so cold.
Hey, that was my first day too. My first GP and first day too. So
where you almost didn't make it to day 2 because you didn't wake up, and I woke up to go. I had got like an infinite challenge package, and then was going to play one of the challenges in the morning, and I woke up and saw Tim was still there, and I was like, dude, your first round starts in like 20 minutes. And he just like got up and like sprinted over there.
Oh, fuck.
All right, so like I said, we're going to be focusing on Vintage tonight. Let's just kind of get right into it. I think to start, we were hoping we could just kind of tell everyone what we were playing in Vintage Champs. I have my list pulled up, so I'll walk through quickly here. I was playing White Eldrazi, which shouldn't come to surprise anyone who pays attention to me. It's my deck of choice in Vintage, and I played it to some success over the course of 2018. So I had picked it, hoping I can kind of, continue my run. My main deck is the same 60 I've been on for most of the year. 3 Containment Priest, 4 Revoker, 4 Little Thalia, 3 Big Thalia, 3 Glow Rider, 3 Displacer, 4 Thought-Knot, and 4 Smasher. So it's like 28 creatures.
You're running 3 Big Thalia, huh?
I am.
Just due to its strength against Mishra's Workshops?
I mean, strength against that, and also any fair deck. Like, if you're playing fetch land, basically, the card is good.
Yeah, it's brutal. Wait, it doesn't make artifacts come in tapped, does it?
No, it's creatures and
okay. Because if Vayne Artifacts come in tapped in the paradoxical meta, I'd probably run 4 of those bad boys.
It would be insane.
I would play Eldrazi if that was the case.
Yeah.
And I think the deck is dumb.
Yeah, the conundrum with Big
How dare you?
The conundrum with Big Dahlia is obviously that she's legendary, but on the flip side, she's at her best the earliest she comes down. So you have to run enough of them that you can somewhat reliably draw one early in the game, but that you're not flooding out on legend.
And, 3 seems like a good number. Yeah,
I think that's where you want to be. I'd personally, if I wanted any less than 3, I'd probably just play 0 and replace her with some other effect. Because she's also not a wonderful top deck late game outside of being a first striker.
Yeah.
So that's my threat package. It's 28 creatures all told, which is a large chunk of the deck. Then I have a Chalice and a Thorn, which are kind of obvious choices. I have the 5 Moxen, a Lotus, a Soul Ring, and a Mana Crypt, which are all also relatively obvious. 1 Karakas and 5 Plane. And then a Strip Mine, 3 Wastelands, 4 Ancient Tomb, 4 Eldrazi Temple, and 4 Cavern of Souls. So that's like 22 lands plus 8 mana rocks. So the deck is basically half mana and half disruption.
You just have half mana, half creatures, and then Chalice Thorn, is that?
Like, essentially, yeah. 30 mana, 28 creatures, Chalice Thorn.
Fair enough.
Elegant deck construction.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like I said, I've been on that 60 for most of the year. I feel like it's designed in such a way that I'm pretty happy with most components of it, and I feel like against a broad general field, it has some play against much of what my opponents are doing. At the same time, I think that with a deck like this, I mean, it's true of any deck, but especially this, a lot of the decisions have to come down to the sideboard. So I spent a long time tweaking my board for this event. What I landed on was 3 Kataki, 2 Fragmentize, 3 Plow, 3 Null Rod, 1 Ratchet Bomb, and 3 Cage. And I think later in the show, we're going to kind of talk about what we felt like worked in our lists and what didn't, and I'll have some thoughts about that and my main deck as well. So that was what I was on. Nothing kind of particularly spicy. Like I said, it's my preferred deck, and it's the one I will just always play in a sanctioned event. But I did try to design it with the meta in mind. I was particularly expecting PO to be kind of the deck to beat going into the weekend, because it's been putting up tons of numbers and getting lots of buzz, and it seemed like all of the spikier members in the vintage community were wanting to be on PO. So that was my main focus, but I also wanted it to be able to beat, Shop, Xerox, and Dread and Oath are not quite as worrisome to me because they had fairly strong matchups to begin with. But I'd say the board was primarily designed with Shops and PO in mind. So that's what I was on.
You should be pretty favored against PO, I'd think, overall, right?
That's what you would think. My testing is that I have a strong general game plan against them. It's disruption in the clock. I think that there are 2 weaknesses I've run into. One is that PO is just on a generally much higher power level than this deck, because it has way more restricted cards. Like, it's just doing more busted things than what I'm doing. So I'll lose some games to that. But also, White Eldrazi, and this is true of a lot of Eldrazi lists and to a lesser extent of Shops lists, has a weakness to like singleton haymakers. So if your opponent, you might have them pretty well locked down, but if they just slip in like Tinker for Blightsteel,
right.
Some of the older PO lists were playing balance, so like they might balance you. And the thing that people are doing now is a lot of Karn. So what that means is there's this tension where I'm pretty good at locking up the board, but they might be able to, maybe I'm missing one angle of attack and they can slip through there. Time Vault would be another example of that. Maybe I'm stopping them from casting lots of spells, but they just drop Time Vault and key and win. So I found in testing it's roughly 50-50. I felt slightly unfavored just because I can lose games to, again, something like Tinker Blightsteel, or if I'm on the draw, I might just lose game 1 where they just go off.
Yeah.
It's a non-blue deck, and non-blue decks are always going to have some vulnerability to combo decks just killing them. But I would say it's Chop is my worst matchup, and it's nowhere near as bad as Shops.
Fair enough.
So then, on that note, what were you on?
I was on Shops. My main deck was relatively spice-free. Pretty much a stock list. They have 3 Hangerback Walker, 4 Walking Ballista, 4 Arcbound Ravager, 4 Phyrexian Invoker, 4 Steel Overseer, 1 Chief of the Foundry, 4 Foundry Inspector, 1 Lodestone Golem, 2 Phyrexian Metamorph, the whole contingent of Moxen, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, and Lotus, a Chalice, a Thorn, a Trinisphere, 4 Sphere of Resistance, and then the typical land package of 4 Tombs, 4 Factories, 4 Workshops, 1 Strip Mine, 1 Tolarian Academy, and 4 Wastelands.
Yep.
The
extra Hangerback is like the only thing that's probably different than Montolio's chance list last year, right? I feel like that's a recent thing people are doing.
Hangerbacks? Usually, yeah. I'm running 3. I've seen a lot of people be doing 2 Hangerbacks and 2 Chiefs, or 2 Hangerbacks and 2 Metamorphs, or an extra Metamorph to be 3. Just stuff like that, but it's pretty stock. As for the sideboard, I had a little more spice. I had 4 Grafdigger's Cage and 2 Crypts. Tormod's Crypts, that is.
Yeah.
This was partly... There's been most lists online I've seen running fewer cages and running things like Leyline of the Void. And
why do you think that
my guess is that it's due to survival of the fittest, where the Grafdigger's Cage doesn't really stop it quite as much as Leyline of the Void would.
Well, Cage basically just stops Vengevine, right? But the rest of it can play as normal.
That's it. Just stops Vengevine. So my theory was, that there's not going to be as much survival as there is Dredge, because most people playing Dredge are, doing so because, they're not to insult Dredge players, but a lot of them are playing it because they don't have power and they have Bazaars. And in order to play survival, you need a full set of Bazaars and a full set of power. So I hedged and went 4 Cage instead, also figuring that it was good against Oath of Druids. Then besides that, I had 2 No-Rods, 2 Chief of the Foundries, 1 Precursor Golem, 1 Phyrexian Metamorph, 1 Wormcoil Engine, and my real spice was 2 Thought-Knot Seers in the board.
Yeah.
The theory on that was I wanted a card that was good against Paradoxical Outcome and you could bring into the mirror. And it did that pretty well, but it's hard to cast sometimes. It won me a couple games where I managed to rip a Hurkyl's Recall out of my opponent's hand against Paradoxical and stuff like that. And then there was another game where I drew 2 of them and had 2 Workshops as my only mana source and was just sitting there with 2 cards in my hand. And my opponent was really confused why I had 2 cards in my hand and wasn't casting them with Workshops. But
yeah, I mean, a lot of these decks, specifically PL, but I guess to a lesser extent something like Jeskai, have a lot of things like Hurkyl's Recall or Shattering Spree, and Thought-Knot, if you can cast it, just gets around all of that really effectively. I had a number of opponents all weekend comment on Thought-Knot being just the card they're the most terrified of.
Yeah, it's really good because most people, again, they're not expecting discard against Workshops. They can hold their Hurkyl's Recall in their hand, wait till the opportune time, and I'll attack, and they'll think, okay, I'll get them at the end of turn with it and go off next turn, and then second main I slam a Thought-Knot Seer, and okay, well now they're casting their Hurkyl's Recall in the main phase when I still have a chance to replay Thorns and such, or not casting it at all and getting it pulled out of their hand or what have you. So it's pretty good. It did its job pretty well when it was cast. I was very impressed with it when I could cast it. Unfortunately, you can't always cast it.
Yeah, Mishra's Workshop taps for artifacts.
Yep. It is an issue.
Tim, what did you play this weekend?
So I played Belcher. And in the past, I've played Expedition Map, Tolarian Academy, Belcher. I've noticed that with that build, it is so mana intensive on the front end to get expedition map going. You're kind of incentivized to play so many of the spirit guides that it kind of it doesn't have that other route to win with Mind's Desire or Tendrils of Agony. Yeah, you're making a lot of mana, but you're just not getting that storm count up. So I decided to go with Land Grant and Tropical Island. And I had been playing around with 4 Land Grant. I settled on 3 and the single Tropical Island as the kind of just get it going. And so as far as let me kind of break it down. So 4 Goblin Charbelcher. As far as fast mana, we've got 4 Mox Opal, 4 Chrome Mox, the 5 OG Moxen. For other 0 casting, we've got Mana Crypt, LED, Lotus Petal, Black Lotus, and then Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith. That's the acceleration for the artifacts. And as more of like engine side of it, I've got 3 Paradoxical Outcome. I've done as much as 4 before and as few as 2. It felt like I really it doesn't seem that when it's good it's just good, but it seemed like I was casting it for 2 and 3 sometimes, and I just wish I'd rather have another 3 or even 4 mana draw 7. So I think maybe in the future go back to a Days Undoing or Diminishing Returns sort of build.
Yeah, I mean those are sick.
Yeah, they're pretty good. So in the past I have played the Leyline of Anticipation in the main. I decided to just relegate that to the sideboard. It felt a little cute, but I definitely was missing having the 4 of 3 mana draw 7s in the Days Undoing. But as far as cantrips, we've got an Ancestral Recall, of course, 1 Ponder, 1 Brainstorm, 2 Preordain. So it seems it's a little light, I think.
Yeah, 2 Preordain seems a little bit sketchy.
Yeah, I think maybe if I had to redo it, I'd go to 4 full Land Grant just to ensure that I get that first blue mana, which is so important in the deck. And then maybe bumped it up to 3 or 4 Preordain, and maybe play just a little. if a Belcher deck can be considered grindy, maybe make it just like more of a staying power. Really like try to sculpt your hand, try to go off. As far as the draw 7s that I did have, of course, got the Paradoxical Outcome at 3 each. A Memory Jar, a Windfall, Wheel of Fortune, and a Mind's Desire. I guess you could kind of consider a draw 7. Mind's Desire, I think I only cast it twice in the tournament, once for 10, and of course I just I beat her I beat her like 3 times over in that turn, and then later in the match I did it for 5 and completely whiffed.
Yeah, I think that Mind's Desire, what's the threshold for, like, 4 is when it's sketchy, 5 is usually enough, but not always, and then 6+ is like you have to be pretty unlucky for it to whiff.
Right. Yeah, but going on that 5, it was just like I had like 19 Storm, and I had already cast a couple draw 7s, and I'm just like Paradoxical. It sucked.
Well, you just have so much air in these style decks, right? That like it is pretty reasonable to just draw into a ton of mana and nothing else.
Yeah, you draw, you get 3 Chrome Mox revealed with Mind's Desire, and you don't have any blue cards to exile to it, and yeah. But rounding out the rest of the deck, a Tinker, a Yogg-Will, a Demonic Tutor, Tendrils of Agony, 4 Force of Will, 4 Pact of Negation, 1 Living Wish. Yeah, I think 4 Pact of Negation's a bit much.
Well, I said ooh, and then you immediately said Living Wish. I reacted to the wrong space.
Okay, yeah. So one of Living Wish in the main actually had 3 in the side too. Let me finish out the rest of the main. We've got 2 Defense Grid and a Chain of Vapor and 2 Flusterstorm. That Singleton Chain of Vapor was not near enough anti-hate. I'm so dead to Null Rod. I really should have been packing at least a Hurkyl's Recall in addition to the Chain of Vapor. There were so many games where I'm just like, okay, my outs are top deck Trop Island and then top deck Chain of Vapor. That's all I can hope for. And the odds on that are not very good.
Yeah, and we can talk more about that. But yeah, obviously walking into the tournament where PO is public enemy number 1, you don't really want to be weak to Null Rod.
And I totally was. And I in the sideboard as part of the Living Wish package, I had a Ingot Chewer. Never. I think I got it to my hand a couple times. I never actually cast it. But also targets for the Living Wish, a Mishra's Workshop, and a Tolarian Academy.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and those actually turned out really well. I'm glad I decided to bring both with me. It was pretty much anytime I was Living Wish for a land, it was 50-50 whether I felt Tolarian Academy or Workshop was better. So I'm really glad I had both of those. Sometimes, just depending on, if you got a Belcher in hand, you want the Workshop. If you're looking to chain out a bunch of draw 7s, go ahead and get the Academy.
Anything else in the board?
Yeah. So 4 Leyline of Anticipation. Typically, I was bringing those in against shops while I was on the draw, just to get a chance to dump my hand before they dropped a taxing effect. And also 3 Simian Spirit Guides and 2 Elvish Spirit Guides. I would also bring those in against shops or any deck that I felt would possibly bringing in Null Rod, just to give me some sort of chance to maybe cast a Living Wish for an Ingot Chewer and trying to make it to where I can play Magic again.
Sure. So to be clear, was this your brew, or is this like based on things you've seen before? Because the vintage Belcher lists I've seen are mostly like mono blue, Expedition Map, Tolarian Academy type things, and then more recently they've incorporated the Paradoxical package. But this seems pretty different than other Belcher decks.
Yeah, I guess I would call myself the designer of this deck. I don't know. I'm looking at it right now. I was like, Jesus Christ, Tim, what were you thinking? And it's super sweet. I got a lot of metaphorical high fives from my opponents all weekend on just kind of like the having the balls to play something like this in a big tournament. I'm looking at it, and there's a lot I would change. I think I would go back to the Expedition Map and a bunch of Spirit Guides.
Well, this is maybe a good time then to transition into talking about our individual tournaments. So, not to have Tim's reaction spoil how he did. Tim, do you maybe want to give us a walk through how the event went for you?
Sure. So I opened up against a guy named Tony. He seemed really new to the format, super nice guy. He was... someone just handed him an unpowered Eldrazi deck, and he Null Rod.
Yeah. Yep.
He just Null Rod. I don't even. I just never had a chance. I eventually did land a Belcher. I didn't have enough to activate, and then he next turn Null Rodded me, and it was just like, oh, Tony, you're such a nice guy. Why are you gonna do that kind of shit to me, man? So I started off the day with a loss. Round 2 went up against unpowered 8 Moon, and that was another Null Rod experience. And I don't want to spoil it for you, boys and girls. Null Rod kicked the shit out of me all day long. So thankfully, I had built the deck to be as fast as possible. So sometimes I was able to do a little damage before, at least get some mana making, just get some board presence down before they dropped a Null Rod. And then round 3, played against Unpowered Eldrazi again. She was a very nice woman. Apparently her boyfriend just handed her a deck and said, "Hey, you want to play in this tournament that I'm playing in?" She seemed pretty new to Magic in general.
Yeah.
When I started going off, I started keeping track of Storm with a die, and she's like, "Now, what's this?" And I was just like, "Oh, there's going to be a card that's going to do something, and it's going to do a lot of it over and over." Yeah, she's actually one I Mind Desire for 10.
Well, if you've never played Magic before, at least Vintage has pretty intuitive interactions and nothing too weird would happen.
Yeah. That's probably the best format for someone new to the game.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially when they see the card text on Bazaar of Baghdad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The wall of text that
is shortened to draw 2, discard 3.
Yeah, at some point she put a Null Rod on the stack. Thankfully, I had force and a blue card, and I said, as the stack got cleared, I said, thankfully, I was like, oh god, I'm so glad I had force. That card is literally the worst card in the format against me. And I was like, shit, why did I say that? If she has no clue like what the format's all about, and the next time she sees a Null Rod pop at her head, she's like, oh, this guy said this is really good against him. I should cast it again. I was like, oh my god, if I lose because of that, I feels like such an idiot. I ended up getting it. I didn't write down my next match, but it was a loss. Round 5, I played against Jeskai Mentor, and I got it. It was kind of a grindy match, if you can say, for Belcher. It was just lots of counter spells back and forth, and I ended up just activating Tar Belcher against him.
Yeah.
So grindy, you mean like 4 or 5 turns total?
Like closer to 4 turns, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Not too grindy then, just semi-grindy.
It's funny though how Belcher is like. You never think that deck wants to grind, but at least it has going for it that all you need to do is resolve a Belcher and activate it. It's not like you need a critical mass of spells to get there. So if they grind you out, you could still just top deck and win.
Right, and as the game, as long as there's, I mean, I know I'm saying it over and over again. As long as there's not a Null Rod down or a Stony Silence, I keep drawing cards, and eventually I have a hand that's like Flusterstorm, Force of Will, and 3 Pact of Negations. And it's just like, as soon as I get a Belcher, there is no way this Belcher is not resolving.
Yep.
And then I ended up later in the day beating Shops twice. Felt pretty good against that. I guess they just didn't. Looking back on it, it's just like, oh, it's such a shitty, like, basically, if they had Null Rod, I lost. If they didn't, I won.
Well, every time I played that matchup against you, I've gotten it with my secret weapon, which is hope that Tropical Island is in the top few cards of your deck. And so far, that's worked for me. I think I have 2 game 3s off Tim now where that's happened.
Yeah, that happened a couple times where the Belcher fizzled. But I think in both of those times I was able to come back and just activate the next turn and get them. And then in the final round I was going in 4 and 5. No illusions about making the money or anything like that. I really didn't start off with a goal for the day because I figured if I make a goal with this kind of deck, I'm just not going to meet that goal, and I'm going to be disappointed. So I was just going in to play well and have a good time, and for the most part, I was doing that.
And that's something I'd like to maybe talk a bit more about after we get through our tournament reports, goal setting, and expectations.
Sure. So round 10, I came up against Jeskai Mentor again. And game 1, belched him out. Turn 1 or turn 2, something like that. Game 2, he just had all the counter spells in the world and was just winning the card advantage game. Game 3, I have enough to cast a Belcher but not activate. So his first turn, he goes Ruby, Pearl, Library of Alexandria, taps out, and puts a Dak Faden on the stack. And I just hang my head into my hands, and I just like, oh, he's gonna steal this fucking Belcher.
Why don't you repeat that line of play one more time?
Right. So he plays Mox Ruby, Mox Pearl, Library, taps out, and puts a Dak Faden down. And y'all at home may realize Dak Faden costs blue, and he didn't do that. So I called Judge immediately, and he just, he played the Library instead of playing his fetch land and cracking it. So he just insta-scooped right there. He seemed a little disappointed in himself, but he realized that I was just as obligated to say something to the judges. You know, it would be on me to maintain state.
Yeah, I don't think that's anything against you, but that definitely sucks for him. I don't know that he had to scoop, but you could see how he maybe just went on auto tilt, and round 10, that's a brutal thing to suddenly do to yourself.
Yeah. In the just for fun bracket, I might just go get a beer at that point too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think going 5-5 or 5-5 with an asterisk on that last round. You know what? I'm proud of it. I played well. There was only a couple. With a deck that has this much power in it and these many broken cards, sometimes your opener is just insane, and there's 3 or 4 insane routes you can take to it. And so there was a couple questionable plays, but there were, in my opinion, just no straight up punts. The deck was, it's frantic, but I felt like it was as good as I could have hoped for.
Yeah, well, on our cast, our sort of precursor to the vintage episode, you had suggested that one of your main goals for the weekend was to just not have any real punts that you were disappointed in. So that's definitely something to, be happy with. Likewise, as we kind of alluded to, picking a Belcher deck with few outs to Null Rod on the weekend when PO is the thing everyone has their sights on is tough. So going 500 in that meta is not bad at all, I would say, especially with a brew.
Yeah, and I guess when you put it that way, that the meta was so hostile to PO that and given that, I think actually I feel a little better about it now. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, I'm here for you. So with that, was there anything that you think you'd change about the deck? Extra Chain of Vapors or what?
I think no, because I had my Chain of Vapor Mental Misstep a couple times in the day, so that's just too much of a liability.
Hercules, maybe.
Yeah, I'm thinking Hercules, even though it's like, with a Null Rod down, it's even harder to get to the 2 mana than the 1. I'm thinking up the Spirit Guides, and if you're doing that, you might as well play Expedition Map and Turlarian Main. So I think it's going to be a while before I sleeve this up again. I want to play some real Magic the next time I go to a vintage tournament. But yeah, I think that's something I consider is going back to that kind of build.
Sure. Yeah, I hadn't really considered just how weak to Null Rod you are. I guess now that you're saying that it's hard to even cast a 2-drop, then sure, if you have 1 land in your deck, there's not too many options. Counter Magic, I guess, is what you're looking at that point.
That's the whole thing, man.
Yep, that's why you play 4 Pacted Negation.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's not really good for a Null Rod on turn 1.
No.
If I want to ritualistic suicide myself, I'll do it that way.
Hell yeah. All right, cool. Well, yeah, thanks for walking through that with us, Tim.
Sure.
Ben, do you want to give us a rundown of yours?
Yeah, sure. So, let's see. My first matchup of the day was Jeskai Mentor. That one I got into. It was pretty standard Mentor Shops matchup, and game one I did Shops things, and once he didn't have a good hand against Shops. Game two there was an interesting, and I can't remember how it went, but I did something like led on Wasteland, Mana Crypt, Foundry Inspector, something like that, and he plays out a land and a Mox, or he played out a land and a Mox Sapphire and pondered, and he thought about it for a good long while, and took another land and passed the turn back. And on my turn, I managed to waste his Volcanic, strip mine his island, and revoker his Mox Sapphire, and then found out that he had kept an Ancestor Recall and another non-land on top of his library, and he had no lands left at that point, and then it was just off to the races from there. He was just drawing and discarding. So I don't think his line was wrong really there, but it was unfortunate for him. I had the strip mine in hand and the revoker, so
that's brutal. That's absolutely brutal, man.
Yeah, it was pretty much the best thing I possibly could have done to him that turn. So anyway, next round I played 2-card Monty, and he won the die roll, put a ley line in the void in the field, and went Black Lotus, Mishra's Workshop, Helm of Obedience, activate, and I just scooped in response to that. And yeah, so I was playing with a show and tell playmat all weekend. So, because I have a vintage playmat that I use that says my name and Ravager Shops on it several times.
And all the many tournaments you've won.
Yeah, it was so I'm playing the show and tell mat, and so he goes, "Oh, you play show and tell in Legacy." I told him that, and he's like, "Okay." So apparently he boarded for Oath of Druids, and so then the next game, yeah, no, I thought that was reasonable. So then the next game I started on Workshop 3-ball, and he just like kind of rolled over and died and laughed and showed me his hand with like 3 Grafdigger's cages in it and shit. And then game 3, that one was rough. I led on, or he led on a whole bunch of Moxen, a Ancient Tomb, and a Painter Servant, and left 1 card in his hand. And I put out a Workshop, a Lotus, a Thought-Knot Seer, it was Workshop, Lotus, Mana Crypt, Thought-Knot Seer, and in response, the last card in his hand was a Braid, which he used to blow up my Mana Crypt. And I'm like, that's fine. And then I just slammed a Null Rod, thinking he has no cards in hand, no mana.
Sure.
And apparently the card he had scribed to the top was Tinker, and ended up finding a, what's it called, Mana Confluence, so that he could cast the Tinker. And I had gotten stuck with a Lodestone Golem in my hand that I couldn't cast that would have gotten it. But I was telling him after the game, I was like, I was going through my brain trying to think of how you win this game right now, and I couldn't think of anything. And then as soon as he cast Tinker, it's like, oh, there it is. Forgot about that card.
So that question is
Blight Seal ran me over.
Tinker, yeah. Yep.
It really is, isn't it? So, so that's that'll happen to you. But next round I played Paradoxical. I don't remember too much about it, except that he scooped game 1 when I was on the play, because I led on Shop, Mox, Golem, Chalice on 0, and then he just picked it up. So I assumed Paradoxical and was correct. And then I grounded out in 3. I managed to get there in the 3rd game through a Mentor, just because I had a Fear effects, and he was like making 1 dude a turn, and I was making better dudes basically, and had some pressure on him. Let's see. Round 4, I played against Inferno Titan Oath of Druids, which is I'm pretty convinced at this point is unbeatable. I had good hands both game and
very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and later in the weekend I ran in. Oh, sorry, what was that?
Yeah, what specifically about that build makes it unbeatable for shops?
Well, Oath in general is pretty good against shops. This one also has a ton of artifact removal, and Inferno Titan's pretty good at nuking my board. And he was also running Niv Mizzet, which I actually Phyrexian metamorphed, so I had a Niv Mizzet in play.
Ooh.
The new
Niv Mizzet. Yep.
Okay, sweet.
Yep. Unfortunately, it's a little bit better in his deck than mine, but what are you going to do?
I'll have some thoughts on that in my tournament report.
Yeah, and he's got, Ancient Grudge, Abrade, just like good spot artifact removal, and it's just pretty tough for me. So I basically rolled over and died in that one. Later in the weekend, I ran into Rich Shea and asked him how to beat that deck with shops, and he said the long and short of it is you don't. So I was like, okay, well, that's... The next round, I played Unpowered White Eldrazi.
Good for that guy.
Yeah, no, he was a super nice guy. I think he was from Michigan. I don't remember his name, though. But, Stu will tell you that our shops decks are White Eldrazi's worst matchup, and I think when you're not powered, that's even worse. But I basically ran him over game one without even knowing that he was on White Eldrazi. I thought he was on colorless Eldrazi, and then he led the next game with the Plains, and I ran him over again, kind of. It was just... it's tough to lose that matchup. And he had mold to like 4 or something in game 2 as well. So it wasn't happening for him. So at that point I was 3-2 and feeling all right. Then I ran into Blue-White Landstill and had an awesome match in general against Landstill. I remember my opponent casting a standstill when I had Mishra's Factories on the board, and he laughed about it when he did it, and I realized later it's because he had multiple wastelands in his hand. And I eventually had to crack his standstill, and he was off to the races. I lost in 3. Game 3 was super interesting. I was actually at over 60 life at one point in the match because he had gotten a mentor down, and I had a Wormcoil Engine. And I just kept slamming into his mentor tokens with Wormcoil Engines because he was down at under 5 life, and I'm just beating him with this Wormcoil Engine, and I got up over 60 from it. And eventually Crucible of Worlds and slowly worked down my lands, and then got an Energy Flux down, and I had to start sacking everything, and then the mentor took over. But he also Fact of Fictioned me in this game, which I felt compelled to high-five him for.
Good for that, dude. That's awesome.
Yeah, I had a Blue-White Landstill player. Apparently it was a different guy cast Fact of Fiction against me too.
I was just super happy to see it.
Were they playing the invasion art?
Oh yeah.
Good.
I don't remember. I assume so. Otherwise, I probably would have commented on it.
Yeah.
I remember that the piles. I had the Wormcoil out at the time, and the piles were a bunch of good stuff, and the other pile was Swords to Plowshares, and I was like, well, I know what you're taking. So it was a 4-1 split, and he took the 1. But anyway, after that, I ran into Inferno Titan Oath again.
Well, what round would this be?
This would be round 7.
Round 7.
Yeah, we were both 3-3. This guy managed to get Niv Mizzet again in play as well, and I also managed to metamorph it again. This is the second time in the day I've had a Niv Mizzet. Unfortunately, he had a Sylvan Library out, and I didn't see it until he did it. That's a really good interaction for him.
Hell yeah.
Because Niv Mizzet pings you every time, or pings something every time you draw a card. So Sylvan just lets him just do 3 on his draw step. Even though he puts 2 back, it doesn't matter. Oh, wow, yeah,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, it was pretty dirty. And I had actually gotten to a point where I felt like I was decent in the matchup because I had metamorphed a Grizzlebrand and metamorphed a Niv Mizzet, and he was at pretty low life, but we just got to, he traded off the Grizzlebrand with me when I tried to attack, and then he was blocking with the Niv Mizzet and shooting my board down, and that, I started working down on life, and anyway, that was another 0-2 to Inferno Oath. Next round was I was 3-4, so I was just playing for fun at this point. Ran into a mirror match. This guy was he was a little older than me. He'd been playing for a real long time. He had a pretty nice deck and was super nice guy too. And it was the long and short of it is I just had better cards. He had like, a few spheres in game one, and I just had a pure aggro hand. And then game two, I had a precursor golem and a metamorph on the precursor golem, and just ran him over. It wasn't a skills thing. I just had the better cards.
Yeah. Yep.
Next round was I played against the survival deck. That was
that before.
I'm not sure I've ever played against it. I played it with my buddy Sam on stream one time. I think I'd played against it on stream. I hadn't played against it in paper though. It was game two of that match was super fun. I got game one, and in game two, we ended up in some weird situation where he had dumped a bunch of hollow ones onto the board before I shut off his survival. And then I had a couple Foundry Inspectors and a few smaller dudes. I think I had Steel Overseers, but which he had Stony Silenced. So he couldn't attack into me, or I'd trade off with his guys, but I couldn't attack into him because my guys were smaller. And I eventually got a 5/5 Walking Ballista down, and which I, again, couldn't attack with because he'd just trade 1 for 1. I didn't want to do that at that point. And eventually my Tolarian Academy got me a 9/9 Walking Ballista, which I then started beating in with, and he had to start chump blocking. And the whole thing came down to him getting an energy flux, me having enough mana to, have my board every turn because of the Tolarian, basically, but was still applying enough pressure. And I had to figure out how he got out of it with he had found a Bazaar and had lethal as soon as he found Wonder to put in the graveyard, because then he could just fly over my dudes. And I had to try and figure out how to avoid him chump blocking me enough, and figured out the only way he could get through my guys is if he activated his Bazaar and discarded 2 Basking Root Wallas and put him into play to chump block. So I had to put down a Chalice on 1 to avoid that, and it was a super good game.
Yeah.
But I did get it in 2. And then the final round, I got paired up against my buddy R, and he was still live for the Unpowered prize, so I just conceded to him. But then we played a few games for fun, and I got it. He was on mono red, Moon Stompy there. So technically I went 5-5, but I consider it 6-4 because I did win the Just for Fun games.
There was so much red stompy prison, whatever you want to call it, powered and unpowered at this tournament. I some guy that was playing it claimed that there were only 8 people on it that day, and I was like, no, there's.
Yeah, I heard that number too, and I don't believe it because I saw it just everywhere. Not even just walking around; it was all over the place.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot. Yeah, maybe we just notice it more because it's sweet, but yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing a full meta breakdown of this because, there were a few observations I had from just the tables that I saw, and I'd like to see if I was correctly or not. But definitely, Blood Moon was a big part of it. So, how'd you end up feeling about your deck for the day?
Pretty good. I'm reasonably experienced on shops, and it's a pretty stock list. It wasn't too surprising. The only thing that I'm debating is whether Thought Not Seer was right. It probably wasn't, but I don't know what would be better there. I might just have to rework the board to get extra null rods or something in, and put something else in for the shop matchup. Maybe take a Tormod's Crypt out and put a Sorceress Spyglass or something in that's decent against dredge and shops or something like that. But it felt pretty good. I ran into a couple bad matchups. And
remind me how many null rods you were playing?
2 in the board.
Yeah, I feel like you want 4, but null rod just feels so bad in Ravager shops. Like it defangs a lot of what you're doing.
Right. So one thing I do when I play against the decks I want to bring null rod in against, I run 2 Chief of the Foundries in the board, and I'll usually bring out my Steel Overseers and bring in the Chiefs and Precursor Golem and Phyrexian Metamorph so that I have more things that don't care about the activated abilities. It's still tough, though. But, I mean, if you're playing against Paradoxical and I have a, 1/1 Ravager and a 2/1 Revoker beating, but I have a Null Rod down and they can't do anything, then that's still a favorable position for me.
Yeah, exactly. That might be enough. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think you had a good justification for why you wanted to play Thought Knot. Even 10 rounds, though, is not necessarily enough to really give you a good read on whether or not it makes sense in the deck.
No, true. I mean, it got me a couple games, and it definitely lost me a game due to its uncastability. But it was pretty good overall. When it's good, it is amazing, and when it's bad, it just sits in your hand and stares at you, and you feel sad about it.
Yeah. And it's got so many eyes, so it really does stare at you.
Yeah, it pierces your soul. It knots your thoughts, I think.
Knocks your thoughts.
Is this stupid that I don't want to play any sort of Eldrazi deck because all the art just looks the fucking same? And it's just all like, okay.
The same. What are you talking about? Thought Knot? Like, they all just eyes and sides, and Reality Smasher is like a giant grasshopper.
Man, it's just a big brown mess.
I've never heard the grasshopper comparison, but also, it does kind of look like a grasshopper.
This is coming from Mr. Merfolk player. How you can complain about all your looking the same?
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you can have many objections to playing Eldrazi. That's probably a pretty valid one, but also they're like the dumbest things that have been printed in the past 4 years. So,
I think you mean best.
Yeah.
I also played Eldrazi in Legacy. I played the Eldrazi 12 post deck. So I was full colorless all weekend, and the Eldrazi did work for me.
Yeah, I saw a comment on the source the other day where someone was like, Mono Brown Eldrazi post is the most Timmy thing you can play in Legacy right now, and that's amazing that it's viable. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I consider myself a Timmy. I love decks like that, and there was one point in Legacy I cast Ulamog twice and it was wonderful. I actually had enough mana to tutor up Ulamog, cast him, Karakas him back to my hands, and Ulamog again.
Was this in a Cloud Post mirror?
No, it was against Steel Stompy of all things.
Oh, that played.
Yeah, he scooped when I played the Karakas and went to bounce it, but
all right, let's continue riding high on Eldrazi. So I'll jump into my report here. We're coming up on we're at 52 minutes deep, so I'll try to keep this moving at a good clip so people don't get bored. So round 1, I played against PO. When I feel like my deck is performing amazingly, my notepad tends to just list all the different hate pairs I play. So game 1 on the play, I went Little Thalia into Glow Rider, and I think he just never got to cast a spell. Game 2, he Blight Steeled me, and like I said, that's a big vulnerability. Game 3 on the play, I went Thorn into another Glow Rider, into a Glow Rider, into a Thought Knot. And that's just an insane sequence. Nothing's ever going to
that poor guy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so miserable. Round 2, I played against PO again. On the play, I made a big Thalia, which is not always great against that deck. I frequently side them out, but sometimes you get them. So I went big Thalia into a Revoker on his Mox and wastelanding him, and then made a Thought Knot, which again is very brutal. Game 2, on the draw, I led with a Kataki and a Chalice for 0 because I think he had just gone land cantripped. Then I stripped his island. I wasted his academy. I played a Null Rod, a Thalia, and a Glow Rider. So there's just no way that can keep playing through that.
Yeah, they're done at that point, it seems.
So I was feeling pretty good because I started off the day 2-0, and PO was the main thing, like I said, that I was kind of focusing on going into the tournament. So going 2-0 against PO felt pretty good. Then round 3, I ran into Landstill. It was a nice dude from Oklahoma. I like made a pretty hateful board and got him down to 3. I didn't write down exactly what it was, but then he was able to cast a Supreme Verdict because I must not have made enough Thorn effects, which land still can also usually hit its land drops. So if you're not killing them fast enough, they can keep playing the game. He Verdict my board away and then played it to Teferi. And as I was saying earlier, Eldrazi can sometimes struggle with those big Haymaker permanents. So when I have an empty board and he has a Teferi, like my only out would be like draw uncounterable Smasher the next turn, or I'll probably never recover. And I did not, so he took over the board. And then game 2, I just kind of never got any traction going, didn't get any real hateful stuff in play, and he just did the land still thing and ran away with card advantage and a Jace. Which, you know, that sucked, but I've been testing, not had great matchups against land still. It was just a deck that I wasn't thinking about going into the event because I feel like it's usually only like 5% of the meta, so I wasn't really worried about it. Then round 4, I played against PO again. Had a really good match against him. We had a lot of back and forth where I'd make hateful permanents, he'd answer them but not kill me, and then we'd keep going back and forth. He was eventually able to end of turn repeal a Thalia I had that was doing a lot of work, and then he was able to cast Time Walk, snap Time Walk, and then PO for 9, at which point I see. Game 2, he made a Karn that was kind of dominating the board, but I had gotten him down to low life, and I like ripped a Smasher off the top that killed him. And then game 3, he made a Karn that just kind of ran away with it. We had a lot of back and forth, where I had some permanents getting him down to low life and was sort of trading on and off with Karn tokens, but eventually the constructs got up to being like 6/6s, at which point they're just bigger than anything in my deck. So I couldn't deal with it. So at that point I was 2-2, which is like, you know, I started off excited, then suddenly felt deflated, and that just kind of like messed with me. Round 5 again, paired up against Jaco Drafty, and game 1 he had like an insane hand with a ton of mana, and he had double Thought Knot, a Metamorph, and a Smasher. But I was able to Thought Knot one of the cards out of his hand, and then I assembled Displacer combo, and it just ran away with the game. He had like he got me down to 8, but then the Displacer just vindicated his whole board. So, and game 2, I was able to. He had a slow start, and I made a big Thalia into a Smasher, and that is just really strong in that deck. But it was his first time playing Vintage. He had said that he was borrowing a deck, so I'd kind of put him on Dredge, which led me to keep an opening hand game 1 with double Containment Priest, and that ended up working out fine because of Displacer. But, you know, I think powered Eldrazi versus unpowered Eldrazi is generally not great for the unpowered decks. And
yeah, that seems like a good rule of thumb there.
Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty easy.
Yeah.
Round 6, I got paired up against DPS, which I'm always happy to play against because that's a deck I enjoy playing myself, and it's like suffered a bit in the meta, so I'm like happy to see people still playing it. I on the play game 1 mulled to 5, but I was able to make a Chalice on 1 followed by a big Thalia, and that was enough to get there because Chalice on 1 is great. Game 2, he just killed me turn 1. He sat there for like a few minutes plotting out his line, and I mean, that doesn't bother me, so I didn't call slow play or anything, and then he just killed me. Game 2, I got him down to 2. I kept kind of a shitty hand that didn't have any hate bears because I had trouble drawing mana. I was mulling and not getting anything good. I got him down to 2, but then he had an end of turn Hercules that was able to get some key things off my board that could kill me. So I was 3-3 at that point. So once you're 3-3, you're kind of like, all right, I can win out and have a solid finish, but that's it. So, you know, you kind of stop caring that much once you pick up your 3rd loss.
Yeah, Vintage though. I'll play it out basically no matter what, just because I want to play Vintage. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very rare that you get to go and play 10 rounds of Vintage. So like play no matter what.
Right.
So round 7, I sit down against my opponent, and he asked me if I'm playing for the budget prize, and I say no. And he's super excited because he is. And he's on the play, and he goes, Swamp, Ritual, Demonic Consultation naming Helm of Obedience, cast Helm of Obedience, and activate it for 2. And he mills a big Thalia which so then he has my big
Oh God.
that just time walks me like multiple times. And while I'm sitting there just like playing out tap land, he plays a Liliana and then an Ensnaring Bridge and then a Nether Void.
Oh God.
Yeah. So that was pretty amazing. So that was probably the coolest thing I saw all weekend. So I was just totally locked out of that game, which was insane.
Oh, I mean, what's your out at that point? Blink Thought-Knot Seer enough times to deck him?
Yeah, there's 0 out. Like I didn't have a board because like he's just completely. Yeah, there was no out. Games 2 and 3 I got pretty easily. But for the record, he was basically playing Legacy Pox. And,
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing. It would not be a budget deck in Legacy. He was playing all the Legends cards, but it met all the Vintage qualifications for that. Games 2 and 3, that deck was super vulnerable to like thorns and stuff, but still, that was definitely the coolest thing I saw. So I ended up winning that match. Round 8, I played against Fate Stitcher Dredge. This was a guy named Nick who I've seen at a variety of different vintage tournaments, and I was pretty sure he was on Dredge. I think I maybe even played against him in one. I wasn't sure, but I knew he was on Dredge. And I was on the play, and I kept a 7 that had a big Thalia that I could cast turn 1. I didn't have a Containment Priest, but it had big Thalia and a Wasteland.
That seems good, yeah, because if you slam the Thalia and he plays a tapped Bazaar and then you just waste it, you might just end the game right there.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I was on the play, I made the big Thalia, and he was just like, oh, that sucks. And he just made a turn 1 tapped Undiscovered Paradise because he didn't want to play out his Bazaar, but like there's nothing else to do. So I opted to not wasteland him and wait for his Bazaar. And then in the meantime, I drew a little Thalia and a Glow Rider, and those just locked him out of the game. And then game 2, I just had all the anti-dredge things, and he just never got
sure.
So round 9, I played against PO again. This was this dude named John who I think he ended up top 8ing the Legacy thing. I game 1 just like did the Hate Bears thing and locked him out of the game and beat him down. Game 2, I mulled to a pretty bad 5-card hand, and he had a like very fast Mentor, and it just ran away with the game. And then game 3, I made a little Thalia, then a Kataki, then a Revoker, and a Null Rod. And he had a balance in his hand, but could never draw a 3rd land to cast it. So he was just very much locked out and didn't have any mana. So nothing too exciting there. And then last round. Oh, go ahead.
What was your record? What was your record at this point then?
I am 6-3 at this point.
Oh, nice. That's a good spot.
Yeah. I started off the day 3-3 and then rallied to 6-3, which is that's exciting because I feel like I can be a player who, if I'm like rallying at the end of the day, that can really motivate me and make me perform better. So I was 6-3, and then I was like, oh, man, so maybe I am going to go 7-3 and have a respectable finish, and this is awesome. So I was getting pretty pumped. And then the round 10 pairings went up, and I got paired against this guy, Chris, who at SCG Con, I beat him in what would have been his winning in. He like got the pair down against me or something. And that was like round 12 of SCG Con. And at that, he was playing Jeskai Xerox. So I put him on that, assuming that vintage players don't like change their decks that frequently. And then he's on the play and he goes like Island, Ruby, Preordain, Go. And I'm like, all right, he's definitely on this same deck. So I like did some irrelevant play. I don't remember what it was. And then he goes Orchard, Lotus, Inferno Titan. It like completely blindsided me, and unless I have exactly Containment Priest Displacer combo in my hand, I'm just not going to ever beat that. Like I need to have the combo and mana to activate and exile the Inferno Titan, or my deck just can't beat an Inferno Titan. So that was pretty brutal. And then in game 2, I brought in, a variety of different anti-oath cards, which are not like amazing against Inferno because they can just play the like control game and hard cast their stuff. But like you have to bring in your cages and stuff against them anyway because they might just oath you.
Sure.
But then this was one of the few times the weekend deck like shat out on me with draws where I like mulled the 5 and kept a hand with only like colorless cards, and it was not an amazing hand. And then he meanwhile, I was able to like make turn 1 double cage, but he just kind of sat there and made his land drops and eventually made an oath. And then he called a judge and he was like, so I have a question. If I have my opponent has these cages and I oath, I can just choose to not mill the creature and then just draw it on my draw step, right? And I was like, oh, great. So he's just going to mill into something that he can cast.
He's got a tutor effect going.
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He oaths into and draws a Niv Mizzet, which he casts. At this point, the only thing I have on a board other than the cages is a Revoker on Dak Faden. So he mills into Niv Mizzet. And he also has a Dak Faden on board that's shut off. On his draw step, he pings my Revoker for 1 with Niv Mizzet, and then he has Dak Faden active, which with Niv Mizzet is insane.
Oh, God, yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, it's super brutal. So I died. I didn't even scoop. Like, I just died a turn or two later because he was just drawing a million cards and killing me. So that was like a bit of a bummer to lose that last round because I felt pretty good going into it. But like the dude was, a good player, and he got his vengeance on me for beating him at SCG Con. So I guess story-wise, I can't really complain about it.
So pretty solid run overall, 6-4, right?
Yeah, 6-4. That's good, man.
Yeah, nice. That's solid.
It's funny. I think almost our entire crew finished either 5-5 or 6-4. Patrick Vincent was our highest finisher at 6-3-1. And then, yeah, like Tim, you were 5-5. And then there were a handful of dudes who like 0-3 drop. But yeah, I think almost everyone was 5-5 or 6-4, which I guess statistically is not that weird, but still. But yeah, I felt pretty good about the deck overall. I was fortunate to dodge shops all day, which I have a great record of dodging shops at this point. I missed it all day at Eternal Weekend last year. At SCG Con, I only played against it once, and that was Ben. And this year, I dodged it all day. So it's my worst matchup, but I seemingly just don't ever run into it. Likewise, I was happy with how my configuration worked out against PO. I ended up going 3-1 against PO weekend, which was a lot better than what my testing against it has been, where I feel roughly 40-60. Which I think is just game 1, making a hard time dealing with all the thorns. And then game 2 and 3, I'm able to bring in 3 Kataki and 3 Null Rod. And unless they just kill me immediately, that's frequently enough. As I said at the beginning of the call, my big weakness in that matchup is them just making some powerful permanent, which historically has been something like a Tinker and a Blightsteel or a Mentor. And they still do that, but they also are playing Karn now. So it's relatively easy for them to cast a Karn against me. And then once the constructs get to a 6/6, they're bigger than anything in my deck. So I need to think about how to beat Karn. I mean, part of it is probably just proactively revokering him. And also casting Thorns so they can't ever make a Karn. But once it hits the board, that's a problem. So that was like one structural weakness I noticed. I also thought that I continue to be weak to really fast combo. I mean, as a non-blue deck, I can just lose to getting turn 1 by something like DPS. And then I've also had some trouble with like the more controlling decks. Like I said, 2 of my losses were Landstill and Inferno Oath, where if they are able to just kind of 1-for-1 me or 2-for-1 me effectively, or cast a sweeper and then make some problematic permanent, I can never catch back up. So those are things I have to think about how I want to approach moving forward. I haven't come up with an answer to those problems yet. I think the only obvious change I would make to my deck is I maybe want to add another white source to it. I played a side event this weekend with an extra Plains, and that felt really good. So I might add another Plains or another Karakas, which helps me cast cards like if I wanted to run Stony Silence, for instance.
What would you cut to make room for a plains, though? Are you just trimming a soul land at that point?
I think it's either going to be a Glow Rider or my Soul Ring.
Soul Ring, really? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, Soul Ring is obviously amazing. It's great for casting Eldrazi and for activating Displacer. And just in general, if I can make it, it's good. But it's the only missteppable card in my main deck.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also getting more interested in Null Rod as a thing. And cutting a Mana Rock is maybe not the worst idea if I want to do that. But I do really like Soul Ring. So I don't know. I think chances are I'll just cut one of the Glow Riders, just go down to 2.
Mm-hmm.
Although even that I'm skeptical of because I do just really like Thorn Effect. So we'll see. But overall, the deck felt pretty good. I ran into Eric Virgo while I was there, who top-8'd last year, and he's a good player from California. We were talking about White Eldrazi, and he was just saying that he and his buddies have been testing that deck, and they came up with a brew or a build of it that they felt like could beat every single thing in the meta, but just gets crushed by shops. And I think
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked about this so many times. I'm sure listeners are tired of hearing about it, but I think that's just where the deck is. Like, if you build it correctly and play it correctly, you can do really well, but you do just have to. And I managed to dodge that vulnerability to just not play well enough and have some bad luck. So, there's in-game things I think I could do to improve. There's some tweaks to my list. But overall, I felt pretty good about the deck.
Yeah, concerning something I would change is I think I'd go back to the Days Undoing Leyline of Anticipation. I mean, it's this deck's never gonna win a giant tournament, but so you might as well just have as much fun as possible. And casting a bunch of draw 7s on your opponent's upkeep is pretty sweet.
Yeah, that is the definition of as much fun as possible.
Yeah. But I'm excited. I know we have an Austin event coming up in a week and a half or so, and I'm excited to play a real deck, and hopefully I can take that one down.
Yeah.
Can I interest you in some Mishra's Workshops, Tim?
God damn it! I'm not gonna play it.
Yeah, I'll share some details on that event at the end of the call. We're about an hour and a quarter in here, so we're going to want to start winding down soon. I think, now that you guys all know what we did, we were going to talk more broadly about the vintage meta and kind of how it looked on the weekend and what we're all thinking. So do either of you guys have any kind of thoughts or feelings about where vintage is at, be it either on a broad level or just what it looked like after champs?
So I'll point out I know this is an incredibly small sample size, but here's my matches again in order. Mentor, 2-card Monty, Paradoxical, Oath, White Eldrazi, Landstill, Oath, Shops, Survival, Moonstompy. If you notice, the only deck that repeats is Oath. Everything else was just faced at one off. And I haven't seen vintage that broad in quite a while. So I think that's great. There's some different strategies. We have a few Thorn Seer type strategies. We have, multiple Bazaar decks, I think is great. We've got different styles of blue decks. We have both the Druids. It's from that respect, it is very, very open, very balanced, I think, and it's pretty fun. There's definitely, I've heard this criticism, and I think it's fair, although I'm not sure I agree with it, is that a lot of the games are boring and lopsided and one-sided. So even though it's balanced, you get, too many blowouts basically. And maybe I'm not seeing that because I play Shops and it is kind of 50-50 against everything, but I could understand, if you just roll over and die to Paradoxical, then Paradoxical is not very fun for you to play.
Yeah, I'm basically fully in agreement with you, or agreement, I should say, because that was my experience of the weekend. I did have repeat matchups in that I played PO 4 times, which was kind of insane, but all my other matchups were different. I think I said this on the manager, but my feeling is that Paradoxical as both a deck and a card is pretty awful to play against. Like, it sucks seeing your opponent just draw 4 and know that they're going to be up a bunch of mana and draw more cards. That's really hard to beat. And it can feel shitty just sitting there and knowing that like they're probably going to win, but you can't scoop. But at the same time, I think that the deck does some good things for the meta. I think it's probably contributed to us finally getting Shops kind of breaking the stranglehold Shops has had for a few years. And likewise, I think other than PO itself, I don't generally have that many bad games of Vintage. Even against PO, I think my single best game of the weekend was against PO, where I was trying to beat the Karn they had. So I understand where that complaint comes from, but I think the meta is in better shape than I've seen it for a long time, and that kind of reflects itself in the top 8, where unlike last year, which was 5 Shops and 3 Oath, we had, I think, 6 different archetypes.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Yeah, the top 8 was. I was really happy to see that outcome.
Did you have any thoughts on the meta, Tim?
So I did have quite a few repeat. I played Jeskai Mentor twice, Eldrazi twice, Moon Stompy twice, Shops twice. So it was just like a bunch of 2-ofs pretty much all day. But from what I could see around me, it seemed great. There was I in my opinion, Paradoxical is the best deck in the format right now, but Null Rod just absolutely kills it. And I think that's why we saw so many Moonstompy decks and decks that just can utilize that that Null Rod hate plan so effectively. And I'm glad to see a bunch of unpowered decks at a big tournament like this too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. We started to talk about it earlier, but it felt like to all of us that Moon Stompy was around a lot. And, there's also a lot of Jake Eldrazi. And I know there were a couple things that won the unpowered prize. There was I think Moon Stompy was the top one. There was also an unpowered White Eldrazi and an unpowered Hate Bears that did really well, which is really promising.
Yeah.
I guess as a final thought, and we didn't prepare this question beforehand, but would you guys, there's a BNR list coming up at the end of November. Would you guys add anything to the restricted list or make any changes based off of what you were seeing this weekend?
I don't
think so.
Yeah, it seems fine. Maybe just unban something.
Unrestrictions are always interesting. I know there's a few cards that I've been talking. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but PO has to be a card they can watch, and I think of it almost like I did Gitaxian Probe in Legacy, where I didn't think Gitaxian Probe was too powerful for the format, but it made the format a whole hell of a lot less fun. And PO does have that effect, but it also is it's a cool angle. And it's if it were to get restricted, I wouldn't cry too many tears for it, but I'm not advocating for it either. But I think it's the most restrictable card in the format at the moment.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I also said this on the Managerian, but if I could see PO get restricted without the meta significantly changing, I'd be happy with that because I think it's a problematic card. But I'd rather have it unrestricted and see the meta as it is than restrict it and have it go back to Shops versus whatever is beating Shops for that day.
Yeah, Mental Misstep's another one that is in the same exact vein of I don't think that Mental Misstep is too powerful for the format, but it does make the format less fun, I think. That's one where I would definitely not be sad to see that go.
I get what you're saying, Ben, but I tend to disagree a little bit. It kind of paints you into a corner with some interesting card choices when you're, when you can say this card is strictly better because it costs 2. That's just kind of an interesting thing right there. Just something to consider.
Yeah, that's true. And I thought of that before too. We might be spoiled by Mental Misstep because all the crazy one drops in Vintage are, not dominating, and we're saying, oh, mental misstep's annoying, and then as soon as it gets restricted, we might be begging for it back,
Yeah.
But I would not be surprised at all to see, to be wanting it back after a restriction. But
all right, well, guys, thanks for doing this recap with us. I think otherwise, a quick announcement coming up. We have a vintage tournament in Austin on November 17th. It's the last Romancing the Stones of the year. That'll be at Fourth Tap Brewing, where we've held a number of events. So I think a couple of you guys are coming down from Houston. So hopefully we can see you out here for it.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, and then the very next day we have Vintage in Houston. So full proxy at Brash Brewery at 1 o'clock. It's a good time.
Yeah, we're feeling spoiled for vintage here.
Yeah, I plan to have a very vintagey weekend.
What was the name of the deck that I texted you earlier, Ben?
Esper Ninja Miracle still. That's what Tim's working on.
Well, that seems like a good note to end on. So, yeah guys, good run this weekend, everyone. It was great meeting everyone in Pittsburgh, and look forward to seeing everyone again next year.
Yeah, it was a great time. I'm definitely looking forward to it next year. It is generally the most fun big event of the year for me. So,
yeah, me too.
All right, guys. Well, have a good night. Thanks for doing the recap.
All right. Thanks.
All right.